Hi, and welcome to episode 73 of M1 Yarns and the Michigan Makers podcast. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Jamie. I'm the yarn dyer behind m1yarns.com, and this is a mostly knitting related podcast. We do get into a little bit of yarn spinning and other crafty type of things, but this is a mostly knitting related podcast. So if that is your jam, stick around, grab a cup of something warm and cozy, and perhaps your project, and let's chat. Today I have a very fun topic related episode. I mentioned on a recent episode that I wanted to get into doing videos, not just about my knitting, but about specific topics. So today we're going to do just that. This episode is all about busting your stash of scraps. We're not talking like you have 4 skeins of the same yarn in your stash. No, this is like all the little bits and like half skeins and quarter skeins and mini skeins that you might have left over from a project or a kit, and you don't know what to do with them. I have, for the last 4 years, towards the end of the year, gone through and collected all those little bits, which tend to hang out in my office in baskets and boxes. And I have this giant mason jar that's clear that I got at, I think, Michael's. I'm sure they still sell them. And it's a fun way to display all the little scraps, scrap balls of yarn. And I take all of them and I lay them out on the dining room table and I sort them by weight. And sometimes it's a guessing game between like a heavy DK and a light worsted, that sort of thing. And I categorize them and then I weigh them by weight and try to figure out what I have of what kind of yarn. I put all the fuzzies together, like all the lace weight mohair and Sorel alpaca. And then I try to brainstorm what I can do with these to purpose the scraps. And I'm going to use the word scrap a lot in this episode. And by that, I mean like those little tiny leftover balls. So just so we're clear on the terminology that I'm meaning. And I'm going to give you some project ideas for all sorts of things. And I'm going to walk you through pretty briefly how I did that, but just give you an inspiration and kind of a path forward in case you too are at a point where you have all these little extra scraps laying around. You feel bad throwing it away, and so you want to, put it to good use, which I think is something to be commended for. I mean, you bought the yarn, someone took the time to dye it, some farmer took the time to raise the sheep, and so it should go into a project that you're going to love or that you're going to gift for someone else to love. So without further ado, let me just, and as we go through each project that I've made that is scrappy, I'm going to offer some insight and tools and tricks that you can apply for maybe not that kind of project, but for another one. So let's start with the very first scrappy project that I ever knit. This is, I don't know if you can tell, but by the weight of it, you can kind of get a sense that it is a bulky sweater. I knit this in the fall or early winter of 2019. I think it was like right at the end of 2019. I had a bunch of scraps left over, and you can tell that I love lots of blues and greens, so finding, putting together a palette was really easy. I had just finished knitting the RBG by Parknknit, which is also a bulky sweater, and I thought that was a great template as far as like stitch counts. So that's kind of where I started. I had this bulky yarn, so I used that for all the ribbing. And you can kind of tell like I was, you got to work with what you got. It might not be perfect, but that's what is the fun of these projects, is it's a work of art. I think I used that pattern as like a template for the increases. And then I might have modified the body and sleeves a little bit. I don't really remember. But what I did here that is going to be of note is I marled the yarn. So this was a mix of, I think, DK and fingering held together. And I would like drop a strand and then pick up another one while holding the first one. So like if I have A and B and I would drop B, then I would pick up C while keeping A, if that makes any sense. So that's kind of what marling does, so that you get like a fade effect, a slow transition, which I think is great. So if you have a lot of fingering left over from socks and shawls, that is an awesome place to start, is by holding 2 strands together. So that's what I did on this. My project page on Ravelry says I had so many half skeins and mini skeins that was serving no purpose and gave me no joy until now. I used at least 22 different yarns from various previous projects or mini skeins that were in my stash. I tried to always hold whatever it took to get a bulky weight via the combination of strands. So a bulky sweater is always great for that. And that was really what got me started on scrappy projects. Oops. I will talk really quickly about the 2 projects hanging here. So I'll insert a photo of this so you can see it on me. But this was my next scrappy project, which was done almost exactly a year after that first scrappy project. And what I did for this, I'm just looking at my laptop on my Ravelry page so I can kind of re-review my notes. This is the Feeling Groovy Cardi by Laurel Gervitz. And in my notes, I wrote, I'm using a mashup of yarn marled as the mood struck me. Yarns were mostly purchased at the New York Sheep and Wool Festival and a yarn shop. And this was a pattern designed for knit collage. A lot of their bulky sweater patterns, I think, lend themselves well to this sort of thing. And this, you can see, I had different weights, different textures, and so the gauge kind of varies a little bit in here. But again, that was part of the art. And yeah, you can tell I mashed up a lot of stuff, a lot of texture. I had some of this like silly kind of, it's not fake fur, but you know what I'm talking about. You see it everywhere at craft stores. I had ribbon yarn. I had a lot going into this. So again, another version, but that was a cardigan. Another project type that I think is a great idea for busting your scraps is a basic tee. And while this is not exactly basic, this was a good framework for some summertime scrap busting. I had quite a bit of cotton that I wanted to blend together, and I took the Sorel tee, which is a nice top-down, seamless yoke sweater, and I did a fade. So I held 2 strands together and did the marling again that I talked about, and then in the ribbing I just did solid. So any sort of, like, if you search Ravelry for a top-down seamless raglan or round yoke, just something very basic. I mean, granted, this has something elevated with these dip stitches, but if you just have something basic, then you can let the marling yarn shine as, you know, the fabric. Chronologically speaking, the next scrappy project that I knit was Stripes by Andrea Mowry. And this is essentially a basic round neck, seamless yoke, top down situation with striping. And looking at my Ravelry page, I said I used 13 minis. I had collected over time and added in a few extra for pizzazz. I did some waist shaping because I found that the pattern was coming out way too wide. I'll insert a photo of me wearing this here so you can see what it looks like. I did sleeve shaping. I was not 100% happy with the fit, but I think it was just a gauge issue for me. But this ended up being, you know, basically a basic fun sweater that I love to wear, especially around the house in the winter. And I think is just really fun. So in that, I held one strand of a light gray yak throughout, and then another strand for each stripe from a mini. And I did try to make the sleeves match, which is another tip I might recommend if you are looking for some like type A personality satisfaction, or else like this one, just go wild with it. The sleeves don't have to match exactly. I mean, these pieces are works of art. So late last year, I had just finished another stripy project, which, if you're interested, was a bodysuit. And I had enough leftovers that I thought I could get a scrappy project made out of them by maybe adding in another skein or two. And so I tried my hand at it and I made my first pair of knitted pants. And these are the Ombre all day pants. I will link this and everything else below. And this is Life in the Long Grass yarn. All of it is what I had purchased at Brooklyn General several years ago for that bodysuit. But then I added in this blue for the waistband, which was almost a whole skein. And then I mixed that blue in a little bit throughout just to provide some, I don't know, continuity, shall we say. And this was 2 strands of the same color held together for striping. So no marling, just striping. I did a fold over waistband and inserted an elastic because I felt like it would just give me a little extra security keeping my pants up. And I love wearing these. These are great. They're so comfortable. Great lounge pants. Highly recommend. In fact, I loved them so much that almost immediately I cast on another pair of scrappy lounge pants. And these were a pattern from a book that I believe is out of print. They're called the Knitted Pants by Kristina McGowan. This was all either DK or worsted weight. And then I threw in, I think this was like Aran weight. I did like a double layer waistband and I had to use a different color because again, this is scrap, so you're kind of limited on what you have. Oh, here's a great tip. Divide all your scrap balls if you're doing something like a sweater or pants so that you have two exact balls for each leg, so you can stripe in the same order. So like if this is a 10-gram ball, then this is a 10-gram ball, if that makes any sense. So essentially what you need to do to figure out if you have enough yarn for a pattern is weigh your scraps that are all collected that you're thinking, okay, this is my palette. Weigh it on a kitchen scale, which if you don't have a kitchen scale as a knitter, highly recommend. You can buy one on Amazon for like 10 bucks. That's what I actually use for my yarn business. Nothing fancy, nothing huge. I'll show you. It's like almost paper thin. It's easy to store and it serves the job. You can, you know, change the function to grams or ounces or whatever you need. But when I look at a pattern and it says that I will need, say, 350 grams, I can look at my collection of my palette and say, oh, I do have 350 grams here. I'm good to go. I have 2 more for you. I recently talked to you about how a basic tee is a good one, And the Sea Glass Tee by Wool and Pine is just one of those. I recently finished this. This was made to be like useful for your Advent minis, and that's what I used in mine. 25 Advent minis. So check out that pattern if you're interested in something like this. It is 1x1 color work, and you change color every round. My last recommendation for a scrap busting project, especially if you have a lot of sock yarn, is just a pair of vanilla socks. There are a lot of vanilla sock recipe patterns on Ravelry, and I think you can kind of create your own like splash of flair with that pattern by just striping. Keep notes, like if you stripe by change, I know that this is a solid, but I'm just using a vanilla sock as a model. Let's say you do 5 rounds of one color and then 5 rounds of the next. Keep track and then use your first sock as your model for your second sock, and again split all your balls in half so that you have like sock 1 set of balls and sock 2. And I mean, who cares if you're wearing scrappy socks in boots, because nobody really sees your socks. So I think scrappy socks are super fun. So I forgot to talk about the Kaleidoscope Cardi by Laurel Gervitz, which was hanging above my right shoulder, but it's basically a bulky cardigan. So those are my basic pattern recommendations. A top-down raglan or yoke bulky sweater, or a tee, pants, or socks. I suppose you could do a scrappy shawl. Let your imagination run wild and basically just try to figure out what gauge you would achieve, maybe by holding 2 strands together, or maybe you have heavier yarns and you're just going to create something stripy. So comment below if you've made a scrap busting scrappy project, and if you have any ideas, and let's exchange ideas. All right, thanks for joining me for another episode, and I'll see you next time. Bye.